Morning, everybody. My name's Phoebe Smith, and I'm a human factors specialist at HSE Science Division in Buxton. We provide scientific support to underpin HSE policy and also our regulatory colleagues as well. So this morning's session is going to be about risk assessing work-related stress. So what I'll do is I'll outline the risk assessment process for work-related stress, and then I'll point you in the direction of some materials, most of which are free to download from HSE's website. There's lots of web addresses in the slides, and you'll be able to pick those up. So let's make a start. So work-related stress is part of HSE's 10-year strategy. We aim to reduce work-related ill health with a specific focus on mental health and stress as well, work-related stress. And the reason for that is quite clear, as you can see from the numbers there. You know, over 800,000 people felt that work caused or increased their anxiety and depression, and 17 million working days lost are attributed to work-related stress, sickness, absence. So a significant impact on individuals, and a significant impact on organisations, and a significant impact on the UK economy as well. So for a whole variety of reasons, it's an issue that really does need to be addressing and having some focus. So, as I said, the numbers involved are massive, and it is having an impact on business. And so one of the reasons that organisations may wish to do something is to address those impact on the negative impact on businesses. And through addressing stress, we can not only improve worker performance, there are sort of other things that can help as well. So things like lowering turnover and intention to leave. When people leave, you then have to spend money to recruit to replace them as well. And improve attendance levels. It might be that when people are off sick, you have to employ agency staff to cover them. So again, that has a direct and an indirect business consequence as well. There is a direct relationship, a well-established relationship between work-related stress and error rates and incident rates. So by managing work-related stress, the number of incidents, the rate of human error can be managed as well. And this, again, has an influence on business benefits. There's a reduction in potential litigation as well, and also when you are an organisation that is seen as one that cares, you've got a positive image, you can not only keep hold of employees, but you can also attract the best people to come and work for your organisation as well. And if the sort of flip side of that is if people see that you're an organisation that doesn't care, not only will people leave, also people won't want to come and work for you. So you'll find it difficult to recruit the people that you've lost. If you go onto HSE's website, there's some pointers there about the business benefits, and the slides there on the my right are around just some of a little checklists, some prompts there for you to have a think about what the business consequences might be. And you can also put some pounds on there as well if you want to, if that helps you to build the case when you're trying to persuade senior managers that this is something important that needs addressing. So do go to the website there. There's the securing senior management commitment as well. That's the green bannered leaflet, and that just gives you some hints and tips about how to secure senior management commitment. So there is obviously the legal case as well for managing work-related stress. It is something that is covered under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And also it's about doing a risk assessment for known risks and hazards, and that's covered under the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations as well. So as it says there, employers must carry out a workplace risk assessment to identify potential risks, including risks to mental health. So there is that legal obligation. And then once, as part of any other sort of risk assessment, once you've identified what's going on, then you need to sort of start to put some control measures in place, and then also you need to be monitoring those control measures as well to make sure that they're having an impact. Now, you might sort of say, well, you know, it's not as easy as a fast-moving piece of equipment. It's quite obvious what it is that we need to do to make sure that people can't put their hands in it and come to harm. And this is the process that I will talk you through about how to identify what potential interventions might be suitable for your organisation. So just the same as any other risk assessment, if you've got more than 5 employees, you do need to be writing it down. If you have got only 5 employees or fewer, you don't necessarily have to write it down, but it might be useful just for future reference to make a note of what action you're taking, and you can then review with your colleagues. Now, although the Health and Safety Executive doesn't cover the Equality Act, the Equality Act is something that you might want to have a think about as well. Okay, so that is the legal requirements, and it is worth sort of just reminding senior leaders that there is this legal obligation to undertake a risk assessment at an organisational level. So we don't need to be undertaking risk assessments for each and every individual. That's not what we're asking organisations to do. If there are vulnerable individuals, then you do need to make sure that there is a risk assessment for vulnerable individuals. But in general terms, what we're looking for is an organisational risk assessment, and this is what I'll be talking through with you this morning. So, getting started, you'll be very familiar with this. It is based on the Plan, Do, Check Act, the same as you do, as I said, for any other type of hazard. There's free to download information from HSE's website, the little chart there, and then there's a workbook, and also there's a risk assessment template as well. Now, you don't have to use this template. That template is simply there in case an organisation hasn't got something and they don't want to sort of reinvent the wheel. That's there to help them, and you might have a template already that fits very well with the activities and the way that you organise health and safety management. By all means, go ahead and use your own template. And if you do want to adopt this one, but it doesn't quite work for your organisation, you might like to actually adapt it as well. So don't feel that this is something that is rigid, that you have to complete and it cannot be changed. Adapt it to your needs and use, as long as you're recording the information that is requested there in some form, that's what we're looking for. So in terms of getting started, you're probably doing an awful lot already, and I really urge you to just take a step back and think about all the things that you're doing. When we go into organisation, there are all sorts of fantastic things happening, and organisations don't always recognise that they're happening and don't always give themselves credit for them happening. And the other thing that we find is that there's quite often a disconnect between what is happening and some management systems that are happening in health and safety, or management systems that are happening in HR. So, for example, in the literature, flexible working is seen as quite a positive way of managing work-related stress in some organisations. And often, flexible working is seen more as an employment issue. It's seen in the HR. It sits with the HR department, and it's not seen as a sort of health and safety management process, if you like. So I'd really urge you to, if you're health and safety, to talk to your HR colleagues, or if you're HR, to talk to your health and safety colleagues, and really work together and see what data you've got. And I'll talk about data very shortly. See what initiatives are going on, and I'll talk about evaluation towards the end, but really think about, what are you doing at the moment? Do you know whether what you're doing at the moment is working? And stop and just pause before you launch into sort of yet another initiative. And also think about what there is in terms of your business as well. So try and tie what you're doing into existing business processes or initiatives or language or systems, because that will give this isn't just a sort of a once round tick box exercise. This is a continuous improvement cycle. And if you can tie it into existing processes and systems, it will give it that longevity. And it means that people will see how they won't feel as though they're taking yet something else on, and you won't have to, argue for yet more resources. You'll say, well, you're using these resources already, and all we want to do is just, add a little bit more in, and hopefully it might make it a little bit easier to get buy-in. Not just from senior managers, but throughout the organisation. So what we've done is we've put together a little bit of a checklist, again, free to download from HSE's website. And what this will do is just sort of give you some food for thought and spark some thinking about, as I said, what you might be doing already, what it is that you're doing already but might need a little bit of tweaking. And then we've got an example policy here as well. Again, same as the template. If you've already got a stress policy, might be worth having a look at yours and this example. Make sure you've got all the right sort of things that you need in your policy. This is really just if people don't have a policy, so they don't have to start with a blank piece of paper. Again, you might want to change the language slightly so that it fits more with the language that you use in your organisation. So don't think you have to use this policy and you can't mould it into your own sort of work context, as it were. The reason I've put the sort of posters there, they are priced. I'm not trying to do a sales job. All I'm saying is that communication is really important. Now, if you don't have a comms department, it might be that you want to sort of buy some posters, some pre-prepared posters, or it might be that actually you've got a comms department if you're a large organisation. So get them involved. They are stakeholders. Or it might be that actually communication is something that you can drive down to the teams, and there might be somebody who's really into sort of art and communication. So really build on that and work with your colleagues. Don't feel as managers you have to do all of this. As you'll see shortly, it's really about getting all the stakeholders engaged and really getting involvement across the board, from the frontline workers right up through the senior leaders, so that everybody knows what's happening, everybody knows how they can contribute, and everybody can see the reason for it and how it relates to their situation. So I just want to have a little bit of a chat really about mental health and work-related stress, so that we know what it is that we're actually talking about here. So you'll see HSE's definition there of work-related stress. So it's the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressure or other types of demand placed upon them. And often in sort of day-to-day language, people will talk about mental health, and they'll by implication they'll be talking about poor mental health. And I really would like you to be quite careful about how you use this term mental health, because actually mental health, as you can see from the slide there, is a sort of a continuum from good mental health to poor mental health. We all have mental health, whether it's good or poor or somewhere in the middle. So we need to be careful that we don't sort of categorize mental health as just down the amber and the red end towards the poor, and that we think of it in more holistic terms. And also, people can have mental health, common mental health, diagnosed common mental health conditions such as anxiety, such as depression, that actually don't stop them from working. And actually a good workplace, as in a well-designed workplace, can actually help them manage those conditions as well, so it can be a very positive place for them to work. So my plea to you is, if somebody is diagnosed with anxiety and depression, don't just sort of write them off and say, oh, they're not fit to work in the work, they're not fit to be here, they need to go on sick leave. Work with those individuals, and each individual, just the same as any other sort of disability or any other health condition, don't box people in and label them. Work with individuals to say, right, how do we want to manage this together? Is it helpful to you for you to be in work? And often people will say, yes, it is. Or it might be that they need more flexible working, or it might be that they need sort of, compressed hours or something like that. So please please don't write people off who have got, as I said, clinically diagnosed ill health conditions, because they can be very valuable members of the workforce and really make a contribution. And the organisation can, as I said, can also help them to thrive and improve their mental health. Now, that's down the good end, so that's fantastic, and there's ways that you can measure whether people have got good mental health. And then people might, for various reasons, sort of start to slip down through to coping, through to struggling, and then into poor health as well. Now, the thing with work-related stress is that it's not actually a diagnosable ill health condition. It is often used on sickness notes or fit notes, but actually it isn't an illness. Work-related anxiety, anxiety or depression as a result of work-related stresses, or as you can see from there are other physical conditions such as headaches or gastrointestinal disorders or endocrine, so hormone disorders, or other cardiovascular diseases and illnesses that can result from long-term work-related stress. So you do need to think quite carefully about not lumping work-related stress in with anxiety and depression, partly because it's not a diagnosable illness, but also work-related stress can bring about physical as well as psychological ill health conditions as well. And they can be very serious. So when, heart attacks, stomach ulcers, all sorts of things can they can be really severe illnesses as well if people suffer from work-related stress over an extended period of time. And actually, that is an important point to make. We do tend to use stress in quite a loose kind of way. And we say, oh yeah, no, I'm stressed today, and there is this idea that actually you need stress to get out of bed and to be motivated to go into work or to do things. And from HSE's perspective, we always say that stress is bad. Okay, so if you need that motivator, we tend to call that pressure, and that sort of incentive and that motivator. But if you feel that over a period of time that there is such a demand on you that you can't meet those demands, either because you haven't got the right resources, you haven't got the right knowledge, you haven't got the right number of people, or whatever it is, and that's over an extended period of time, this is when work-related stress can occur, and this is when the risk of ill health can also rise as well. And this is something else that I think a lot of people are a little bit sort of nervous about, is that, going back to my example of a fast-moving piece of equipment, not to be too blunt about it, but the consequences of popping your hand into a fast-moving piece of equipment is fairly determined. You'll cut your fingers off, and if somebody else puts their hand in, they'll also cut their fingers off. So the consequences it can be foreseen, and the consequences between individuals can also be foreseen. However, with stress, people can be exposed to the same hazards, and yet because of individual differences, how they respond to those, whether they experience work-related stress, can differ and does differ, okay? And even individuals over the life course can differ, because people change in their response to stressors. That can change over the life course as well. And this is what makes organisations a bit nervous, to say, well, how are we supposed to know what is going to cause people problems? We're not mind readers at the end of the day. And this is what I'll start talking to you about in the next slide, how you can, the sorts of things you need to be considering. And this is why worker involvement is so important. So we've done the hard work for you. Through research, we have identified that these 6 areas, if they are not properly controlled, if they're not properly managed, increase the risk of stress. As I said, it doesn't mean to say that people will become stressed, but it increases the risk of stress. Okay, so these are the equivalent of your noise and vibration, or your fast-moving piece of equipment, or your airborne dust. Okay, so these are these are the factors, these are the elements that, if they're not properly managed, can increase the risk of stress. So what we'll do over the next few steps in the risk assessment is identify, well, who can be affected. We've discussed how they can be affected, as in physical illness, psychological illness, and then we'll talk about how you go about identifying how these can be managed and reduce that risk. So also, on HSE's website, if you go to HSE's website, each of these is described in more detail there. Okay, so data. You really need to be using your data. And I go into organisations and they are awash with data. And sadly, they don't use all of their data to, I was going to say to best advantage, but actually sometimes it's to any advantage. So before you start collecting more data, stop and think about, what data am I already collecting? So there might be sickness absence data. There might be anonymised feedback from the employee assistance programme, if you have one. There might be exit interviews, so you might get some information from that. You might do a staff survey, so you might get some information from that. These tend to be things that larger organisations collect. Smaller organisations might have might have a feeling for some of the information that these data sets can generate, but not necessarily have them sort of formalised in terms of staff surveys. The stress indicator tool, this is something a tool that you can use. Generally, it's for larger organisations. It is a licensed tool, so you pay for a license depending on the number of people that you have in your organisation. It is quite good because it can compare between different departments, and if you're an organisation with lots of change, you don't necessarily have the same data between the organisations that have come into you through sort of mergers and things like that. But you don't have to use the stress indicator tool to get an idea of how people are feeling. As I said, there are plenty of other data sources that you may have already as well. Thing is, some of the top tips I would say here is about protecting anonymity. So make sure that any data sources you have, you can't identify individuals. And what you're looking for is hotspots and trends. Okay, so you're looking for maybe a department or a team where there seem to be more issues. Generally, we say we keep groups of more than 10 people. Under 10 people, you tend to start to be able to identify individuals, and people will get very nervous about data sources like that as well. It might be also that you can cut your data in different ways. So certainly with the stress indicator tool, you can have a look at sort of frontline staff compared to first line managers, compared to middle managers, compared to senior managers. And as you can see, what I've just done there is the stress indicator tool. So make sure your data sources collect data from right across the organization, because anybody in the organization can be affected by stress. And sometimes I do worry about senior leaders, because there's a lot that they are doing, and you do wonder who they're turning to. Whereas sort of frontline staff have their supervisors have their managers, and you do worry sometimes about senior leaders and who's actually asking them how they feel. So the stress indicator tool and other data sources can help identify that. Also, when you're thinking about your data sources, have a think about leading and lagging indicators. So things like sickness absence data are lagging. Harm has already been, something has happened already. Something like staff surveys, which give you an indication of how people are feeling before harm has happened, that's more a leading indicator. So try and identify some data sources where maybe harm hasn't already happened. And again, the stress indicator tool will give you an indication of how people feel that those 6 areas are being managed, and help you to target as well. Use your data, whatever data you're using, use your data to target your resources. Don't feel that you have to do something about everything that is raised, and I'll talk about action planning shortly. As I said, engaging with staff is really, really important. So surveys are excellent, but they only give you the sort of bones, if you like. They don't give you that deep understanding. And talking to staff will really help you to explore what the issues are. And not only that, it will also I would really encourage you to ask them, well, what could we do to improve the situation? And some organisations are a little bit nervous about doing that because they feel as though they're going to take a lid off a can of worms, and they'll say, well, we can't employ another 100 people, or we can't introduce a whole new IT system. Go back to the reasonably practicable. We're not expecting that. If it's not reasonably practicable, you've got to a certain extent, you have to work with your staff to say, okay, within this sort of boundary, if you like, what do we think, what difference can we make? But also just push that boundary a little bit as well. So don't be too comfortable. Don't reject all ideas if they are going to cost some money. Because it might be that some significant investment in the short term is quite painful in terms of sort of finances, but in the long term actually will mean that people are much healthier, they're much happier, they're much more productive, etc., and going back to all those business benefits that we talked about earlier on. So what we're trying to do while we're engaging with staff is, as I said, to explore what the issues are and what some of the suggestions are for improvement. And some of those suggestions might actually be very small. So, and unless you're on the front line, you might not know that actually would make quite a big difference. So to give you an example of that, we worked with an organisation and a water cooler. Somebody suggested, well, can we put the water cooler, move it from one side of a door to the other side of the door? Oh, that's a bit odd. And what they said was, actually, that was the boss's office, and by the water cooler being on the side that it is at the moment, they actually felt inhibited walking past the boss's office to get some water. And by moving it, actually, they didn't feel so inhibited. And that was quite a stressor for them. Quite a simple thing to do. Unless you were on the front line, you wouldn't necessarily know that was going to make such a significant difference. And actually, it's very quick to do. And something like that you can do tomorrow or next week or whatever. But it shows that you're listening. So I would suggest, I'll talk about this shortly, but I would suggest think about some of these quick wins. Going back to the point that I made earlier. If there are existing staff forums, those might be an opportunity for you to talk to people, but also make sure that people are comfortable talking. So it might be in a team meeting, you take the manager out of the team meeting and, a more neutral person from HR, from health and safety, maybe you get your union reps involved, maybe you get your safety reps involved. They can go and talk to the team, because however much team members say, oh, no, we get on really well with our manager, we don't mind talking openly in front of them. We find that actually people do look to the manager to talk, and sometimes people feel a little bit inhibited. So I would suggest try and make it that people are sort of similar grade and that the manager's not in the room. Right, anything else I want to... No, I think that's probably... Oh, yes, so the regular updates about what's happening. Communication, as I said, is really important. And if you don't... You can trial this in one part of the organisation. So when you collect your data, it might be that a particular department is having issues. So you might say, right, I'm going to go into that department and I'm going to talk to them to explore in more detail. But tell the rest of the organisation why you're going into that particular department, okay, so that they don't feel left out and that they can still see. And then also probably it's worth having a mechanism, maybe a suggestion scheme, either a piece of paper in a box or something, or an electronic equivalent, so that other people can, and then also if there's staff forums in other departments, so that others don't feel left out and they can make their suggestions, but your resources and your attention is focused on the part of the business that where the data is showing there might be a bit of an issue. Line managers are really important. Couple of reasons. First of all, they can have a direct influence on work-related stress and whether people experience it, because their behavior affects people can affect people on a daily basis. So that's one point. And the second point is that also their management style in terms of talking to people, asking them about, managing their workload, etc., can have a sort of a slightly more indirect effect on the role of on work-related stress. So it's really important that we get line managers involved. I think we need to make it clear to line managers that they are not responsible for diagnosing anxiety and depression. They are not responsible for but if they feel that somebody is becoming stressed, or any other health condition for that matter, but if they feel that their team members or a team member is becoming ill as a result of work-related stress, and we hope that we don't even get to that point, that HR is there, the EAP is there to give them, or occupational health for larger organisations. But actually, this day-to-day conversation or week-to-week conversation between line managers and staff is really critical. And you don't actually have to use the word stress. You can just have these conversations that say, what's your workload like at the moment? Are you clear about what it is that you're doing? So things like so we've got demands and control. Can you decide how you do your job? Are you, as I say, are you clear about your role in the organisation and what you're doing? Particularly through periods of change, how do you feel about the change? Let's talk about the change. And at no point do you actually have to say, and is this causing you stress? But through these conversations, you can help people to manage each of those 6 elements and hopefully never get to the point, always stay in the green and never get to the yellow, the amber, or even the red. But then through those conversations, maybe things change and you can pick up those early warning signals where people are moving perhaps from green to yellow, if we refer back to the earlier slide, and further interventions can be put in place to stop them then moving into towards the red end. Lots of resources there to download from HSE's website, and it's really important actually that line managers do have the right interpersonal skills. And so often when we work with organisations, people are promoted because technically they're very good, and there's no other way of rewarding that technical expertise. And that doesn't mean to say that people are necessarily good managers if they're technically very good. So as organisations, I urge them to really understand what is it you need out of line managers, and have those as competency requirements when you're recruiting or you're giving people a development opportunity, and make sure that they, if there is a gap, to support them in moving into the line management role and developing those interpersonal skills. And some people just either may not have them or may not actually want to move into a line management role because they don't want that sort of type of interaction with their colleagues. So do bear that in mind. Just if you're interested, there is a stress management competency indicator tool. This is a self-assessment tool, free to download from HSE's website. This is just an opportunity for line managers to reflect on their behaviour, and also it might give some structure towards with discussions between line managers and their line managers about development needs. So yeah, do go and have a look at that. We developed that in collaboration with CIPD. And then if you do want to give your line managers or your managers a more formal training in work-related stress, then there's an NEBOSH course there as well. That's obviously a paid-for course. So, recording your findings. We in HSE are striving to prevent stress rather than picking up the pieces when somebody has become stressed. So we talk about primary interventions, and this is about looking at your data, so your quantitative data, your qualitative data from having spoken to your colleagues and your workforce, and then seeing how you can reduce the risk of work-related stress before it even happens. So looking at, say, for example, demands. And often with demands, we've been into a number of organisations where on the face of it, you used to think, oh gosh, you need to be employing more people. But actually, when you really look at it, it's the way that work is organised that is the issue. And when work is reorganised and reallocated and roles are clarified, so people know what it is that they're supposed to be doing rather than what they think they're doing because they've been through so many changes, that actually helps with demands. So we don't need to employ new people to employ more people. And that addresses the issue of demands at a preventative primary level. So that's what we're aiming for. However, we also recognise that there's a holistic approach here, and that secondary interventions are around giving people the right skills. So I've just talked about giving line managers the right management skills. Now, you could argue that by having competent line managers who manage their team effectively is a primary intervention, but giving people the skills to be able to do that is a secondary intervention. Don't get too hung up on that. It's just thinking about as it says on the slide there, secondary are strategies for increasing resilience. What we don't want, though, is for people to be sent on sort of mindfulness courses or building resilience courses, and that's the only thing, that's the only strategy or intervention an organisation has for addressing work-related stress. That just doesn't cut the mustard, I'm afraid. It is something that can be made available, but the organisations really do need to be thinking about how can we address some of the issues at source. A lot of organisations rely on tertiary interventions, so things like employee assistance programs or counselling. When harm has been caused, people are stressed, they are suffering from ill health as a result of work-related stress, and there is always a place for that. There is always a place for that, and in the management standards, when you read them, you'll see that although we take an organisational approach, actually there's always a sentence that says, and then it's along the lines of, if anybody falls through this net at an individual level, you also need to have sort of processes, mechanisms to support those at individual level. And this is, if you remember right at the beginning, I said this is where you might want to do a risk assessment at an individual level, is when people are starting to move from in terms of needing tertiary support. If you go on HSE's website, there's information there in the stress workbook that gives you some suggestions for things that you might like to try. Now, we're not saying that those are things that will work. Each organisation has a very different culture, a very different context, and therefore whether something works or doesn't work will depend very much on that context and culture. But what we're doing is giving you some food for thought. Now, I'm sure once you've spoken to your staff, you'll have a whole list of possible interventions. So you probably don't actually need to be adding or getting ideas, but that's just there. The information on the website is there just to get you thinking. When it comes to action planning as well, think about, as I said, prioritizing. You don't have to do everything right now. And in fact, when we've worked with organizations, I've seen an action plan, I think it was about something like 100 actions, and nothing happened because it just became noise in the end. The most successful organization did just one thing, and they did it very well because all attention was focused on that. Now, if you've got your data, you've collected your quantitative data, you identified there's a particular issue and it may be a particular department or a particular role, you've gone and spoken to them and they've fleshed it out and they've made some suggestions, you've got a nice sort of audit trail, for the want of a better word, or a justification for why you are introducing particular interventions. However, some of these interventions, particularly if they're primary, can take 6, 12, even 18 months. You might have to go through a planning round and bid for some money. So don't just do a long-term action, because people will think, oh, well, I spoke to them and nothing's happening, when actually you're working feverishly in the background. So this is where your quick wins come in. This is where, that water cooler, moving it from one side of the door to another, that's where those come in. So I would say probably about 4 or 6 quick wins, things that can be done tomorrow, next week, next month, really quickly to to show people you're listening, you're actively reacting, and people go, oh yeah, no, they are. Things are changing. So have, set these, two hairs running, as it were. This is quite a complicated, I appreciate, quite a complicated sort of flow diagram, and I'll not go through it in detail now. I'll leave you to study it afterwards. But what it does do is really helpful, actually. What it does do is just talk you through whether an intervention is primary, secondary, or tertiary. So it just helps that sort of either something that you've got in place already or something that you might be implementing. So it is worth having a look at this. It is a really helpful flow diagram. I've talked quite a lot about this already. The one thing that I haven't talked about is about communicating, and then also measuring success as well. So you really, I talked earlier about sort of the business impact of stress, and for just about any other investment, a business would want to see a return on that. They would want to say, right, we invested in this. What are we getting back for it? I don't know, a new IT system. How much greater is the efficiency, or whatever? And it's amazing how many actions are put in place by organizations that are never then evaluated. Are they actually having the impact that they think? So really do need to be, when you're putting your actions together, when you're planning your actions, really think about your success criteria. Now, again, we have given you a bit of a template, this action planning template. Don't be too constrained by that. If you've got your own, use your own. If you want to adapt it, that's fine. But it does give you those headings about, things like who's going to be taking responsibility for this. Now, again, think very carefully about that, because so often it is pushed to the health and safety manager, the health and safety manager, the health and safety manager. Now, first of all, the health and safety manager can't do everything, and neither is it appropriate. So it might be that actually people on the shop floor can take some responsibility at a more local level, really get them involved and get a sense of ownership, but also then make sure that there is a senior leader, a senior board champion to fight, or to, shouldn't use the word fight, should I, but to continue to emphasize the importance of board attention on investing in health and safety as well. I mentioned the one bullet point about how can actions impact other initiatives. Think about those other initiatives and how can you sort of integrate them, or how can you build on them, or how can you draw on them, so that you can sort of effectively take resource from other initiatives, and then tell people about what you're doing. All along you need to be telling people what you're doing. I get so frustrated when I go into organizations and they're doing all sorts of fantastic things, and when you talk to the frontline staff, they go, oh no, I didn't know that was happening. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. So blow your own trumpet, all right, and keep blowing it as well. Keep repeating it, because new people come in, there's a wash with information, and sometimes these messages get drowned out and people forget. So just keep blowing your own trumpet. So the last step, any risk assessment, plan, do, check, act, you need to be monitoring and reviewing to make sure that the interventions that you're putting in place are actually having the effect that you think they are. If they are, and this is why you need these success criteria to help you make that judgment about whether the interventions are having the effect. And it might be qualitative. It might be going and talking to people and saying, I don't know, you asked for weekly update emails, or weekly update updates and meetings. They're happening. Is it communicating the information that you want? Is it doing what you had hoped it would do? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say, yeah, but actually if we do this, it would be even more effective. So listen to that feedback. Sometimes they go, well, do you know what? Actually, no, it's not. Maybe we should try something else. And that is absolutely fine. Do not flog a dead horse. So do not pursue an intervention that is not having the desired outcome, because if you collected the data, you've got a very good reason for stopping doing it. adapt it if that might help, but actually if it's just not doing what you thought it was going to do, stop it, and you'll have plenty of other suggestions, and try another suggestion about how to improve. Have the guts to do that. I know it takes guts, but have the guts to do that, have the courage to do that. Also, as I said, this isn't a once round. This is a continuous improvement cycle. You will be going around this every sort of year to 18 months, 2 years, and therefore you want to make this whole engagement, data gathering, and engagement process as efficient and as effective as possible. And therefore, have a think about how you might sort of A, slicken it up, B, integrate it with existing management systems to make it more efficient. So think about the impact of not only the interventions, but the process itself as well. So we've come to the last slide there, and just sort of a summary of some of the top tips there. Interventions don't have to be expensive. Some of those quick wins are really very inexpensive, but can make a big difference to how people perceive the organisation, perceive how health and safety is being managed in the organisation, perceive how those 6 management standards are being managed. And, actually, those management standards are not mutually exclusive. So if you address something, for example, that is aimed at demands, quite often it will have a ripple effect. And you won't necessarily have to address each of the 6 in turn. It might be that, as I said, first of all, use your data to focus your attention on which ones are of most concern, but there will be that sort of that ripple effect for the other elements. What else do I want to say there? Yes, the last point that I probably want to make is do spend the time getting the buy-in. It might feel as though you are, you want to move quicker, and you want to get going, and you want to go out all guns blazing, and getting the stakeholder buy-in is taking too long. But I assure you, it is absolutely worth that investment of time. Talk to the senior managers, talk to your HR or HSE, your health and safety colleagues, talk to the operations managers, talk to your line managers, talk to people, talk to your unions as well. So really engage people, because if you don't, it will bite you later on down the line. And if you haven't got that senior management buy-in, and you want to make an investment in an intervention, that they might put the stoppers on it, and all that good work and all that engagement that you've had over the last sort of 6 months will just wither and die, and actually you'll end up in a worse place than if you'd never started it. So it really, sorry, that sounds so depressing, doesn't it? But it really is worth the investment of time of getting that stakeholder in investment, that stakeholder buy-in early on, because it will feed through. So the organizer said, HSE's approach is about being proactive, it's about using your data, it's about focusing your attention, it's about doing a risk assessment at an organizational level. You don't have to do one for every single individual. You do need to pick, really identify those individuals that are that are displaying signs of stress, or have declared that they're stressed. So you do need to pick them up at an individual level. But generally across the organization, it is about doing this and looking at where you can get the most return on your investment. Focus your energy, focus your attention and resources. Planning is really important as well. Think about the peaks and troughs of activity in your organization. We worked with a supermarket, and they said, don't do anything in sort of, between mid-January and mid-February. We're in the flour department, and 14th of February is a really busy time for us. Food industry, they've got a really busy time from, when I say the lead up to Christmas, it starts in probably September, October, if not earlier. So think about your work cycles when you're busy, and don't try and engage with people then, because they'll not be interested. They'll be interested in delivering the work. Get them when things are maybe a little bit quieter. And really exploit what it is that you've got already and build on that. These last, oh no, sorry, Working Minds. So Working Minds was developed for small to medium-sized enterprises. If you have contractors that are small to medium-sized enterprises, point them in the direction of Working Minds. You might be a small business, so you might be interested. But actually, there's quite a lot of larger organizations that have been looking at this as well and finding it really useful. So I'm not saying don't go and see it. Don't go and have a look at it, and and you're not allowed to have a look at it. By all means, go and have a look at it. But it really was targeted. So it's about simplifying the language, using slightly different language, same premise but slightly different language. And you might, as a large organisation, find that language actually chimes a little bit better with the way that you speak within your organisations. So do go and have a look on the website there. But the last couple of slides that I've got here are just further free to download resources. This one was developed with the TUC, so that's for sort of health and safety reps. And then the other one, the green bannered one, that was for employees. And then also wider, CIPD's got lots of resources, Mind has got lots of resources, ACAS has got lots of resources, a lot of the unions have got some excellent resources. So there's lots and lots of information out there. So please do go and explore all the information out there. In fact, there's we're awash with information. And Big Borrow and Steal, I mean, this is why these organisations put this information out there. Obviously acknowledge the source, but, people really do want to promote good health and safety, and particularly, and manage work-related stress. So that brings me to a close. There is a Q&A box there, so if you haven't already posted questions, do post your questions in the Q&A box. We will continue to monitor those, some of which we may respond to. So yes, if you want to put those in throughout the day, by all means do so. That doesn't close when my presentation finishes. We will respond to some of those, and then what we're thinking of doing is pulling some of the questions together, theming them, and then sort of responding to some of the general themes as well. So do keep an eye on that. So I think that brings me to a close. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I thank you very much for your time and attention.